Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
And I'm Raya, and I'm the daughter.
It has been cold around here. We've had a combination of rain and snow. I went to the grocery store the other day, and my windshield was covered with some kind of ice. And I looked in the back and realized I didn't put my snow brush in the car.
Oh, that's terrible in the winter.
And I had no ice scraper at all.
Oh, no. What'd you do?
Well, I looked in my wallet, and I took out my Kohl's card.
And you scraped off the window with your card?
Well, I tried, but I didn't get much off of it. I looked at the card, and it says it's good for 20% off.
We're talking about what to do about internalized homophobia. Dad, do you know what internalized homophobia is?
Well, I do now that we've been talking about it.
But not really so much before we prepared for this.
No, of course not. And it is inside that you yourself may be feeling homophobic. You're concerned about where you are and how that is being presented to the outside world.
Any minority community experiences some measure of feeling like you don't quite fit in, and the people around, because they're the ones that represent quote unquote normal.
Exactly.
That they're the ones that have everything right, and you're not really as good as the rest of everyone
And I
else.
experienced that for 2 years when I lived in Japan.
Really?
When everyone looked at me because I was left-handed.
I knew we would get that one in here. But it's true, though. I remember being in the first grade when my teacher was teaching us how to use scissors. And Mrs. Aronson said, now, a few of the kids in the class use left-handed scissors. And, oh, wow. And I remember thinking, boy, that's really different.
Yeah.
And I came home and I had an actual conversation with you about it. Now, we talk about that one on just about every episode here. The idea of internalized homophobia is feeling like I'm not enough. It's never enough. My relationships are not as good as straight relationships. It might come up feeling like I'm not wanting to tell people about my relationship, or it might mean I really envy other people, but I'm going to just not let it out, let it be known what my orientation is. It might mean somebody invites me to go to Pride and I think, I'm not really gay enough for that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not enough. I'm not where I should be. I'm not something isn't sitting right with me.
So this podcast, we're going to talk about what can we do to overcome homophobia, how science can help. We'll talk about being a friend to yourself. We want to talk about the lockout. We'll talk about surrounding ourselves with others who are like-minded, to confide in someone else, to challenge your own negative thoughts. And you're going to feel much better about just being yourself.
Boy, that sounds good to me. Let's dive right in. So the first thing that we can do, strangely enough, is to go back and study science. And this was not something until we did our research for this podcast that I would have put at the top of my list.
I don't have to dissect a frog, do I?
I hope not. That's not something I'm looking forward to. But the research shows that again and again, looking at the actual hard facts that are out there can challenge our negative perceptions of ourselves. When we realize that we're not strange, we're not different. And that might mean going and doing, for instance, you could go back and play our podcast from June 19th, 2023, where we looked at the science of, is it unnatural to be gay? And we just determined that, no, it's not.
Of course, we didn't determine that. Really, science determined that. And it's a fact. Yes.
We looked at several different journal articles that had been published and the facts that they were uncovering there. But it doesn't end just there. You can open up any modern textbook about anthropology or about human sexuality, or really any textbook that is used in regular classes, college classes, or most public schools, because science has come to understand that there is nothing wrong with being gay or any of the LGBTQ plus identities.
They are actually discovering more things all the time. And that's interesting as well. So they not only discover more things that are happening in the animal world, but with ourselves as well, that there are certain parts of us that are defined in ways that we don't even realize. I think today there was a report, or at least it was in the last couple of weeks, a report about how our brains may work differently if we're male or female. And that means some of our parts are born one way and some are the other. We've talked about that before, about being on different levels, which was also an excellent podcast.
By studying science, we can actively unlearn misconceptions about our LGBTQ plus identities. We can discover what the actual authorities have said. And thankfully, we're in a good place in history right now where the authorities are lining up. This maybe would not have been the same point 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. But as we are today, our authorities are coming around and understanding. And you can go pretty much anywhere. That's the nice thing. You don't have to limit yourself to, well, where can I go to sources that are going to be friendly? You can actually just go out and look at the sources.
Well, it's nice about having the internet as well. But on the other hand, you have to be fact-checking that to make sure you're getting accurate information.
Number 2.
Yes.
Talk to yourself like a friend.
I remember a thing called the lockout. I read about this one time and it made so much sense to me. People were in a ship, and if the ship were to be hit by an iceberg or a torpedo or anything else, the rule was that people who were in that ship had to close the doors and lock them tightly. They were then inside one of these pods. And when they were in this pod, there could be all kinds of things happening on the outside. There could be enemies on the ship going out and killing people, but you were in this pod and you didn't know what was happening on the outside. Your world was in that pod. And in that pod, you couldn't worry about what was going on the outside because you didn't know. And what you don't know can't hurt you. The lockout really does work. I was in a show one time, a Broadway show. We were rehearsing.
Not Broadway.
Not real broad. I mean, it was a musical theater.
Oh, you were in a musical, okay.
Yeah. No, I wasn't on Broadway.
Wow, something new I learned about you.
I actually was on Broadway once. I think it was between 7th and 8th Avenue. And there was a show there. Yeah, we did see a show there once.
Yeah, good.
But the business that we owned was really going through some very difficult times. It was just beating me down all the time. I thought at one point I was going to be homeless. If you're in a situation where something is bothering you so much, it's as serious to your health, your physical health, as it is to your mental health. And you have to have a time to rest from that. I learned that if you can't put it out of your mind, schedule time to worry about it. Now, that might sound really crazy, but it actually works. So I was in this show. When I was at that rehearsal, I gave my whole attention to the show and to the cast and to the people that I would socialize with. During that time, the set and all that, I refused to think about the situation our company was in at the time. It was similar to the lockout. I was there only. I wasn't back at the office. I was there. As long as I was there, that was my world. What was happening on the outside didn't matter at that point. And it did give me enough time to feel some relief from the pain that I was experiencing.
Sometimes we feel like positive thinking alone is going to get us past our negative thoughts. But I think we need to acknowledge that there's sometimes a place where we can't just get rid of those. There's a reason why we have those negative thoughts to begin with. Our brains are really good at figuring out what the world is like and what keeps us safe. And sometimes those negative thoughts are there for a reason, because we really need to be watching out for, well, what are people going to think? Well, this is not a safe place to just talk about my orientation. And so we can internalize those things because we know that if we don't, we can end up getting hurt. And the reason the lockout can be so important is because we give ourselves space for protecting, recognizing those negative thoughts, but yet finding sometimes where we talk to ourselves the way that we need to be, talking to ourselves like a friend and locking out those negative thoughts.
Number 3, surround yourself with other queer people, like-minded people.
And this is one that's especially important when you're dealing with internalized transphobia. Dad and I actually had a little discussion about this before this podcast, because it's easy to think, oh, well, what I need to do is just be around allies. And in fact, there is a place for that. We'll be talking a little bit about that a little later. But I want to just say that as somebody who is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, that it's really, really important to find other people in the community, because we can resonate in a way that allies just never fully understand. I remember when I first transitioned, I'm a transgender woman, and one of the very first things that I wanted to do was find a community where I felt at home, where I felt affirmed in who I was. And I thought, I wonder if there's any festivals that I could go to. So I found a festival in Ohio. It was called the Ohio Lesbian Festival. And unfortunately, they closed it down right before COVID, and it has never come back again after that. But boy, in those first few years, when I needed community, I didn't know anybody there. And I remember wondering, is this going to be a safe place for me? So I actually called up some of the organizers and said, hey, I'm thinking about driving out to Ohio. I'd like to come to this festival. Am I going to be welcome there? And is it all going to work out okay? And they said, you will love it. Please come. You will meet people. And in fact, I did. I have made lifelong friendships there that have been some of the deepest and closest friendships that I've had. Being in that space where I knew not everybody there was necessarily lesbian. In fact, one person made the joke, there's no test at the gate, otherwise I'd be working the gate, she said. But you could figure most of the women that were there were lesbians or bisexual or felt at home in a queer community. And there is a sense of belonging that I never felt anywhere else. You might find that in a local LGBTQ center. You might find it among, maybe you have a group that meets where you can talk about the same things. You might find that community in all kinds of places, but find that group.
So how long did it take you to drive there? How many hours did you put in just to get there?
I want to say 12 to 16.
You drove 12 to 16 hours to find a like-minded group. Was that your first group that you really felt comfortable with?
I think it might have been. Yes, it was. This was very early on. This was probably 2 months after my transition.
And what did that mean to you?
It was, I can't even quite describe it. When I came back, I felt like I was finally recharged.
That's really important. So this was your first situation. So if you're out there and you are not finding a like-minded group, you might have to drive a ways. But the payoff clearly is there. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
It is worth it. It is worth it to invest in finding your people. Absolutely, it's worth it.
And they are out there. Everybody has people out there.
And number 4, very closely related, confide in someone. So this is one where it doesn't matter so much, although it can help if it's another queer person, whether they're gay or lesbian or bisexual. But this can also be an ally, but it's somebody that you trust.
That makes it therapeutic. That's the idea. Somebody that you trust and you can just share with. They don't necessarily have to give you suggestions and ideas on what to do, but just the idea that you're speaking with them about your situation and how you feel and what you think you should or should not be doing. Those kinds of things can be very helpful because they are so therapeutic. I am a writer, and I have discovered very early on that writing is very therapeutic. I wrote my memoir, and in my memoir, I wrote a lot of different stories. I started out with 1 or 2 stories, and I was surprised that at my age, I could remember things that I hadn't thought of for 70 years, things that were when I was a 5 or 6-year-old kid. And I was able to write a story about that, which is so therapeutic. And you go back and realize it was always there. And it was something that had affected me so much that it affected the way I acted even today because of a situation that I had there. And writing is therapeutic. Having someone to speak with is therapeutic. Sometimes you get a professional person who is sympathetic to the LGBTQ community, and you pay them to do it, and that's okay. And that is therapeutic. You're going to learn how to challenge your own negative thoughts right after this.
I'm Monica Scarbin. I love listening to the Transcendent podcasts, probably because I've been a guest speaker. I've been listening to these podcasts for over 2 years now and have found them to be not only inspirational, but very informative and emotionally lifting to my spirits, especially when I'm not feeling very hot. I'm a supporter, and I'm glad to be a supporter. Please go to Transcendent.com, click on support. By as little as $3 a month, you can cancel at any time.
Number 5, challenge your own negative thoughts. We all experience those intrusive thoughts that come in and say, you're not good enough. Everybody's going to be judging you. You're not safe. You're weird. You're a freak. We can challenge those thoughts by asking ourselves, is this thought helpful? Is this really in line with reality? Is there any evidence that contradicts this negative thought that I have right now? And more often than not, we will find that it's ourselves, again, looking for potential danger zones, so we're not treating ourselves as we would treat somebody else. We would never think of talking to somebody else with the negative thoughts that we allow for ourselves. And we need to combat those. Say, I'm done. I'm not going to allow this negative thought to have space here. You can't control the thoughts that come into your head, but you can control whether or not you're going to give place to them, or whether you're going to challenge it and say, no, this is not okay. We all have intrusive thoughts. That's the nature of being human. But we can control whether or not we're going to cultivate those.
There might be things you can do that you haven't thought of. Some people use meditation. Some people use prayer. Some people just think about their happy place. And I play pool with a friend of mine, and sometimes I am just really doing a bad job of it. I just seem to be missing the shots that I should be making. They're easy shots. And then finally, there's a really tough shot out there, and I make it. And I say, "Oh, happy dance." And I take the happy dance. And it does matter. It really has an effect on you. It's a little bit like giving yourself momentum. That's a wonderful thing to do.
Well, we could all take a cue from you. Number 6, just be yourself. Too often we feel like we should be a certain way. I should be this way, or I should be that way, or I shouldn't be doing this. Just let it go. Anytime you start to feel like you've got this weight of shoulds on you, there's probably some thoughts in there that need to be challenged.
Yeah.
You probably don't need to be doing those things. Should, why? Why should you be such and such a way? Who said? Just be yourself. Stop putting that pressure on yourself like you need to try to be somebody else. You need to match up or line up or be somebody else. I remember a friend of mine, I'm sure I've shared this story before, but a friend, a gay man from a working relationship that I had, he shared the story of when he was in high school. Before he was out of the closet, everybody used to tease him about being gay. And then his senior year, he finally, I don't remember if he chose to come out or if somebody outed him, but his senior year, he was out. And all of a sudden, it stopped being fun to tease him for being gay because he owned it. He was actually out and proud of who he was. And when you own who you are and you decide to just be yourself, there's no longer anything to tease. One way that you can figure out what that means to just be yourself is to look at other stories. I have been intentionally reading more queer fiction recently because I want to see what life looks like outside of myself. And I actually read a story recently that really moved me. It touched me emotionally in some ways that I thought, whoa, wow, I didn't expect to be moved this deeply by the story. And I actually reached out to a friend and said, I need to talk to somebody about this, like we were talking about earlier. I confided in somebody and said, ooh, wow, this was hard. And my friend said, well, have you figured out what it is? And I said, well, I'm still kind of working through. And together, we helped me to piece together some pieces that I was able to see in other people. And I think I want to be like that. I see it modeled. And I realize that's me. That's the me that I want to be. I want to just be myself. And boy, life is so great when you get to just be yourself. Number 7.
The last thing you need to understand, give it time. With time, they say time heals all things. That may be trite, but in reality it does. In reality, some of the things that you just don't seem to be making progress with, when you look back at some of those things 4 or 5 years ago, they're not issues anymore. Some of those you'll even forget. You don't even remember that they were around. But the whole idea is know that most things aren't going to be, oh, I'll just take this point and it's all over. No, probably not. Not that it can't be, but it would be unusual. And in fact, if you're able to do that, we want you to write us and let us know. We'll tell the story here.
When I was in grade school, we did the project where you take a seed and you plant it inside of a styrofoam cup filled with dirt. And then every day we would come over and watch it, and I would think, well, come on now. The next day, well, I thought for sure it was going to sprout. Nope. The next day, well, for sure now. The next day, well, come on now. And it took 2 weeks before we finally saw a little bit of a sprout coming up. And then even then, it took forever. By the time it was really growing, we had moved way beyond that project. I had forgotten about it. I didn't even care much anymore. And that is how our lives are. That things that can feel overwhelming at the time, boy, I just feel like I'm never going to get out of this internalized homophobia that I'm dealing with. But we give it a little bit of time. Things take care of themselves. We keep working on it a little bit here, a little bit there, and we come out on the other side.
So before the plant would leave, you left.
That's right. Yeah, it kind of grows on you. One other thing that will grow on you is this podcast.
Yeah.
I hope it does anyway. We're grateful to have you coming back week after week. We've got a lot of great things that we want to be sharing with you. We think you're going to like what we have coming up.
Yeah, 2025 is going to be a great year. It's going to be a great year for you. It's going to be a great year for us. Let's be great together. And with that,
We'll see you Monday.
So with that, we want to think about,
Number 7.
yes. And with that, no, we want to think about number 7.